So over the last year to year and a half, there's been one piece of gear that has been by far the most inspiring and most used thing in my studio. And it's not a guitar, it's not a pedal, an amp, a plugin, a modeler. It's this. This is a groove box and sampler. It's called the Digitakt II. It's made by a company called Elektron. This video is not sponsored by Elektron. I did buy this. I have not found a more useful, more inspiring, more fun tool to use in my entire life than the groove box and the sampler. It doesn't have to be this one. I'm going to show you a few different options and different price points and for different use cases. But the point of today's video is to hopefully get you thinking about sampling and using a tool like this in your own creative work at home. Now, this video is not sponsored by Elektron, but it is sponsored by Sweetwater. A lot of the stuff that I show you today is going to be in the description box down below. Those will be Sweetwater affiliate links, and a lot of the gear I have actually picked up through Sweetwater over the years. They've got a huge selection of samplers, groove boxes, drum machines, synthesizers, anything even remotely related to today's topic, you'll be able to find in the description box down below. And I thank Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. So with all that out of the way, let's take a step back and talk about sampling. What is it? Now, a quick disclaimer before we get into this topic. I've only been doing this for about a year and a half, and I've learned a ton, and I have gotten sort of my own workflow down in this space, but I am by no means an expert when it comes to sampling and creating music with this workflow. And I imagine there's a lot of people watching this video that know way more than I do. So just keep that in mind. When you're watching this video, take some of my words with a grain of salt. So what is sampling? Sampling essentially is the idea of taking any piece of pre-recorded audio and modifying it, reworking it to fit in a different musical context. It's a broad definition because it's a really broad concept. You can literally take anything, any recorded piece of sound or music or an instrument, and through the sampling process, use it to create something new that didn't exist before. We can warp and mangle the audio. We can speed it up. We can slow it down, slice it and chop it and move it around to create new things.
You could try other sections. Right, maybe you can start with this one. Let me hear just how the sequence is playing. I want to put it right there. Right?
And sampling is massively popular and has been for decades. In fact, I would argue that no matter what genre of music you're into and what you listen to, you have heard sampled or sample-based music in your favorite songs and tracks by artists of all stripes. Now, you can sample any kind of audio, but some common examples are things like drums. Taking short one-shot snippets of a specific drum, for example, and putting them through some kind of sequencer to create a new drum pattern. Or, as is popular in hip-hop, taking a break beat or a drum break and chopping it on the grid and then rearranging those chops in a different way to essentially rearrange the pattern that the original drummer played. If you listen to any kind of hip hop, you've definitely heard chopped drum breaks as the foundation of so many amazing hip hop tracks. Another common example of sampling is sampling other songs to create new songs. Obviously, this is popular in the hip hop world, but it bleeds beyond just hip hop. There's so many examples of amazing songs that use samples of other songs to create the new song. for me, the way that I like to use sampling the most is to sample myself, to sample my own playing and warp it and rearrange it to give myself new ideas. This is what I found to be the best use case. It's super inspiring. It's a lot of fun. And it's helped to make me a better guitar player and a better musician overall. It's kind of changed how I think about music in general and how I think about arranging in different parts and different sounds and timbres and how they all fit together. Since picking up a groove box and getting into this workflow, I think my musical mind has expanded more in the last year and a half than maybe the last 10 years almost. So there's two main reasons why I love using a groove box or a sampler in my daily sort of creative work. The first is that pretty much all day, every day, I'm sitting in front of a computer screen. I'm editing a video, I'm answering email, I'm recording a podcast. And when it comes to making music and being creative, I have spent years working in DAWs, like Pro Tools, for example. And I still do. I mean, there's things that you can do in a DAW quickly and easily that you either can't do on a sampler or takes a lot longer. But the flip side to that is because this is not in the box, so to speak, you end up making stuff that is completely different than what you would end up making on a computer. That's at least my experience. And even between the different samplers and groove boxes, you end up making stuff that you could seemingly only make on that groove box. Like right now, I'm sitting in front of my MPC X SE, and the way this thing works is completely different than the Elektron Digitakt II or the Octatrack. And as a result of that, the type of music that I make on this is very different than the type of music or ideas that I come up with on the Digitakt. The second main reason I love these things is because they are so good at meeting you where you are. So let me show you what I mean. I've got a project pulled up here on my MPC, and this is kind of how I would go about setting up for, a session, basically. I've got a bunch of tracks started. So there's one-shot samples, there's drum loops, there's synth loops, there's some bass ideas, and there's some guitar ideas. So to start off with here on this one-shot channel, I've got a bunch of one-shot drum samples. Now everything I'm using today is from a sample pack that I just downloaded from Wondertone. Wondertone is one of my favorite YouTube creators out there now. I'll have his channel linked below. And he just released this entire splice pack, which is very, very good. And it's got drums and synths and guitar ideas and song starter ideas. So I basically just went through that pack and pulled a bunch of stuff that I thought sounded cool. And to start off with, we've got a bunch of one-shot samples that Wondertone recorded in the studio. So if you're new to this, a one-shot sample is literally just a one-shot, one hit of a snare drum, for example, or a kick drum, or a hi-hat. And you can take all of these different one-shots and program a groove. Finger drumming and programming drum grooves is an art form in and of itself, and I am not good at it. But you can sit here and just right? And you can start to stack ideas up. Program a simple groove, pick up your guitar and start playing along. Start improvising, start writing ideas. But more often than not, what I like to do, because I'm a terrible finger drummer, is take an existing drum loop that I already have and chop it up. And this is one of the things that the MPC is excellent at. So here's a bunch of different drum loops that came from this Wondertone pack, and they're in different tempos and have different feels, but that's okay. Okay, so that's a cool place to start. So what I could do, for example, is set my project tempo here. So we're gonna call it, it's about 70 BPM. So I can just take this drum groove and put it down on the grid of my MPC and use this as a jumping off point to either play guitar on top of, to practice, or to do what we're going to do today and put together an idea for a track. So let's say I want to change this up though. I like these sounds and I like the feel, but I want to program my own groove. So this is the sample editor, and what we're going to do is chop this sample up. Now you can see in the waveform, I've got the drum groove here, and I'm just going to start playing it and hitting these pads. And every single time I hit one of these pads, it's going to add a slice to the groove that I'll be able to play back. So check it out. Okay, so now what I've done is I've placed slice points throughout the groove, and I've chopped up each one of these drum hits. And so now what I can do is go in here and adjust my slice points, my start and end points. So right there on my first pad, I've got a kick with the hi-hat. On my second pad, I've got the snare with a kick, right? So I can go in here and keep adjusting these. So for example, like I want to grab just that open hi-hat, right? So I'm going to move my slice point here, get it right at the beginning, and I don't want that snare drum to come in, so I'm going to cut that out. And so now, out of that whole groove, I've pulled a one-shot sample of an open hi-hat. And so right here, for example, I just want a one-shot of the kick without the hi-hat in, so I'm just going to grab right there. And I'm going to do the same thing here with the snare. And so now I've taken this entire drum groove that I pulled from a sample pack, or that I sampled off of YouTube, or I sampled off of a record, and I've chopped up and gotten some one shots as well as some combinations that I can use to program my own groove. So now what I'm going to do is go over here. I'm going to put all of those slices on to different pads. Copy that first pad over here. So I've taken that original groove, I've chopped it up with different slice points, and now I've mapped each one of those slices out onto different pads here on the MPC, and I can use this to program my own drum groove. So let's put that down, see how this goes. And now I have a whole new groove that didn't exist before, which is pretty cool. So now I can take the same idea over to something like these guitar loops, for example. So on this track, I've got a bunch of different pre-recorded guitar samples. So this first one, this is something I recorded months ago. I don't even remember when. I just had this idea. And if we go in here and look, it's pretty long. And there's a lot of different chords in here, but it's not necessarily sync up to a tempo or anything like that. So I'm going to chop up and I'm going to grab specific chords that I can place on the pads and use that to kind of build out a chord progression and an idea. So I'm just going to play from the top. There's another chord. Little melody idea. And I'm not worried about being accurate here. Yeah. That's nice. So that could be an idea right there. See what I mean? Right, there's a chord progression idea. Just by taking these chops and moving them around. And one cool thing I like about the MPC is that if you notice here, it's analyzing not just the tempo and the time so that you can warp different samples and time stretch things, but it's also telling me what key it is. Now I know what key this was because I recorded it, but if I had sampled something off the internet and I didn't necessarily know where it was, this would give me the key and then I could fine tune it to match the pitch of whatever project I'm working in. Okay, so I've got all of these different guitar ideas mapped out here on the MPC, starting with my guitar loop. And I want to show you something here. So if you notice, because I didn't record my guitar loop with any particular tempo in mind, you notice that the MPC has read this and it's telling me that it's roughly 81 beats per minute. You know, which is about here, right? But if we notice our tempo for the track is 70 BPM. And I want to stay there. This is part of what's so cool about working with samplers is the ability that you have to manipulate and stretch audio in different ways. So I could go about doing this in a few different methods here on the MPC. I could either speed up the drum groove 10 BPM by either reprogramming it with one shots or time stretching it. But I like the tempo that we're at. So instead, what I'm going to do is pitch down the guitar loop in order to get it to sit in time. So here we have our original chords and chops here. And I'm just going to start playing the loop. So you notice how they're not in sync at all. But if I go here and I start to pitch it down, so here's one semitone. It's closer, but still not there. So let's go down one more semitone or a whole step. There it is. By repitching the sample, I've gotten it to fit in the BPM, and in the process, I've made it actually sound kind of cooler. It's got more of that lo-fi character, which is so interesting. So I'm just going to do that to all these different chops here. And listen to how that's changed like the color of these chords. Like that's a cool idea right there. In fact, I'm gonna record that. So. And already I have the basis of a track, the basis of an idea, and I haven't even touched a guitar today. This is based off of something I recorded months ago. And I didn't necessarily have this in mind when I recorded it. I just was messing around. I liked the sound that I had pulled up. And now we've got something kind of cool to start working on. So let's program a bass line. So what I've got here are a couple of options. On one hand, there's a bass loop that I got from the Wondertone pack. So I'm going to chop this bass line up here. And let's see if we can make this work. Yeah, so we're going to repitch the bass down to get it in key. Okay, so there's the bass line, and now I just need to make a quick edit. Because the MPC is kind of like a DAW, I've got this grid editor here. And so I can just move that one note around. So now we have an idea to work with, and I've got my guitar patched in to the MPC here. Because again, this thing is kind of like a studio centerpiece. It's like its own sort of studio in and of itself. And so I can start just playing along. And there you go. We're starting to build out a track. We're starting to get an idea together. And I can further manipulate and mix this stuff and add other parts. The MPC also has like built-in VSTs and synths and instruments of its own that you can use. I mean, it's a really amazing tool. Okay, so what groove box should you pick up? I'm going to give you a few recommendations based off of my experience over the last 18 months or so. And we're going to start with the more beginner-focused, budget-minded stuff and move up from there. So to start off with, if you are sampling curious and you don't want to spend a ton of money, I think you should start here. This is an app called Koala Sampler. There's a free version that's amazing, and the paid version I think is only a few dollars. This is the paid version here. It works on iOS and Android as well as smartphones and tablets. And this is an incredibly powerful sampling tool. If you go on YouTube and search Koala Sampler, you can see what people are really using this thing for. I mean, it's a fully fledged MPC style sampler on your phone. One of my favorite things about it is you can utilize the phone's built-in microphone almost instantly to grab interesting sounds or samples. But the last time I used this, I was on a flight and I decided to grab some samples of the plane.
Touchdown time is 4 hours and 40 minutes. Maybe a few bumps on the way out of Atlanta here initially, but should be a pretty decent ride once we get up.
The other cool thing is because it's on your phone, you can take any of your voice memos and open them up instantly in Koala Sampler, which is really cool. So this is one I recorded the other day, and it's now on this pad. And that's ready to chop up and do whatever you want with it. Now for me, I actually don't use Koala Sampler that much, and the reason is because it's on my phone. My phone is the most distracting thing that I have, and a big reason why I initially decided to get into hardware samplers was to distance myself from the computer and from my phone, to work in a completely new workflow that was less distracting and more inspiring. So for me, the main drawback of Koala Sampler is also its biggest selling point, which is the fact that it's easily accessible on your phone. It's just hard for me to stay focused and use it long enough to get a creative idea out, but that's more of a me thing than a Koala thing. So next up, we've got the Roland P-6. This is a relatively new sampler in Roland's line, and it's great. It's small, lightweight, battery powered, almost literally pocket sized, depending on how big your pockets are. And this is an incredibly powerful groove box and sampler. It will do many things that the bigger, more expensive groove boxes that I'm about to show you will do in a lightweight, travel-sized, battery-powered package. It's got a built-in microphone, so you can sample directly on the device, or you can even sample through USB from your phone or your computer. It's also got a built-in granular engine as well, which is super cool for doing more experimental ambient type stuff. And it's actually very reasonably priced considering its capabilities. I think this would be a really great place to start for someone who is sampling curious and you know that you want to get into the hardware world, but you don't want to spend the big money on one of the more expensive units, and you want the portability and usability of something that is ready to go and battery powered. Now, the main drawback of the P6 for me is the fact that it requires a lot of menu diving because there is so many features and it has so much power in such a small package. Roland has had to utilize submenus and button combinations to access a lot of the features. And when you combine that with the fact that it has one of these old school 7-segment displays, I think that's called. So far in my experience, the P6 has not been the easiest thing to learn. Now, if this was your main Groovebox and you're using it every single day, then a lot of these button combinations and menus would become muscle memory and you would become a power user. There's also a ton of tutorials online for this. I'll try and link some down below. It's an incredibly powerful tool. As far as bang for buck goes, this one is hard to beat. Continuing on with the theme of portability, but powerful and fun, we've got the Teenage Engineering K.O. II. Now, like I said, this was my first Groovebox and sampler, and it's still one of my favorites. I actually just got this back. I loaned it to a friend for a few months, and I was missing it. Now, this is going to be more expensive than the P6, but there are plenty of used ones out there now, and I'll have some links down below to where you can pick up a used K.O. II. This is made by a company called Teenage Engineering, and as such, it leans heavily on the aesthetic and the design and the vibe, but there's a lot of really cool sounds and effects, and you also get the built-in microphone, and it's battery powered, and in my experience, it's easier to use and learn than the P6. Now, the trade-off here with something like this is the limitation. It's only got 64 megabytes of built-in memory, so you don't have a ton of space to record and store samples. And you can also run into things like voice stealing, where it just doesn't have the processing power to play all of the different sounds that you may have programmed. But I actually don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. There's a lot of value in limitation, I find, especially when you're a beginner and you're first getting into something. And I think this is a good place to start because it almost doesn't let you get in too deep to begin with. Plus, just look at it. It's super cool. Now, next up is my favorite Groovebox and sampler, and this is the one that I would recommend as the best all-around tool for just about anybody, and that is the Elektron Digitakt II or the Digitakt I. The Digitakt I was my first Groovebox that I bought after getting the K.O. II. Once I figured out that I wanted to get into this, I went and bought the Digitakt I, and I dove into the Elektron workflow or the Elektron world. Now, from what I've gleaned, I think Elektron can be somewhat polarizing to some people. I don't really understand why. I really love the Elektron workflow, and the biggest selling point of the Digitakt to me is the Elektron sequencer. To me, the sequencing power of the Elektron devices, I think, is the best thing about them. The learning curve is a little steep if you're starting from square one, but it's such a popular device and it's been around for so long that there is so much material out there on the internet to help you learn it, from YouTube tutorials and courses to PDF downloads. If you can commit to learning the Elektron sequencer and the Elektron workflow, I think the Digitakt series, the 1 or the 2, is where you should start if you're serious about using a Groovebox and getting into sampling. Now, there are some substantial differences between Digitakt 1 and 2. I decided to sell my Digitakt 1 at a considerable loss to upgrade to the 2 because I wanted the extra memory, the internal memory, and the stereo sampling. But the reality is, everything that makes the Digitakt 2 special, the Digitakt 1 also has, and you can pick them up used for a steal. So if you're more budget conscious, I think search for a used Digitakt 1 and get into the Elektron world. I can't overstate how much I love my Digitakt. It truly is a desert island piece of gear. If I had to give up every single piece of musical equipment except for a couple of things, I'd keep a guitar, an amp, and the Digitakt. Those would literally be the 3 things that I kept from this entire studio setup. Now, moving on, we have the MPC X Special Edition. Now, I've had the MPC for about 6 months now, and I really like it, but it's not my go-to sampler / Groovebox. And the reality is because it's almost too capable, too powerful. See, I got into this world to get away from the computer, to get away from the DAW. And there are times when I'm using the MPC X where it kind of feels like I'm back in the DAW. And the reason is because it's essentially a DAW wrapped up in a hardware box. Now, this is not a bad thing at all. In fact, the MPC X, I think, is one of the easiest things to learn given its capabilities, given how powerful it is. And the cool thing is, no matter which version of the MPC you go with, the smaller units or the big MPC X, the operating system and the software is all the same. They essentially work exactly the same way and have pretty much the same capability, just in different packages. Now, I went with the bigger version because to me, this sort of acts like a studio centerpiece. It has all of the inputs and outputs and routing capabilities and MIDI. And I like the fact that it has so much real estate for knobs and buttons so that you're not relying so much on menu diving like you are with the smaller MPCs. But you can't talk about sampling in the sampling world without talking about the MPC. Reality is this world wouldn't really exist without Akai and the original MPCs from way back in the day. And I really do enjoy using the MPC X. So I think this is the one for you if you know that you like the DAW experience and you just want to take that into the hardware world, into the sampling world. I think it makes a little more sense going from the DAW world to the MPC world, coming from Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, then going from a DAW to the Elektron world. The Elektron world truly is just a different mindset. It's a different way of thinking about music and the workflow. And last but not least is the Octatrack Mark II. I just picked up the Octatrack Mark II, and I've been waffling back and forth on getting one for almost as long as I've been interested in sampling. In fact, when I bought my first Digitakt, I almost bought the Octatrack, and maybe I should have. I don't know. There are a few pieces of gear in the music world that have stood the test of time, like the Octatrack. In the Groovebox sampler world, the Octatrack is still one of the main pieces of gear that lots of people use, and it's pushing, 15 years old at this point? That really speaks to its staying power and its capability. Now, the reality is I have very, very little experience with the Octatrack so far. I've watched a ton of videos over the years, and I have an idea of its capability, but I haven't really dug in enough yet to have an informed opinion on whether or not this thing works for me. And as such, I don't know if I can recommend it to you. I think you do the research and figure it out for yourself. And because the Octatrack has been around for so long, there are plenty of used examples out there on the secondary market, so you can pick one up for considerably less than the cost of a new one and try it out. But from everything that I've seen, the Octatrack is arguably the most capable, most versatile, most deep Groovebox sampler piece of hardware maybe out there, even more so than the MPC X SE. So yeah, keep that in mind. Okay, this video's been insanely long, and if you've made it this far, you're probably the right person to pick up a Groovebox or a sampler. And I hope you found something useful in this video. Cannot overstate how much the sampling world has sparked inspiration and a new way of working and helped me create new music that I wouldn't have been able to create with the traditional methods of recording and writing music that I've been doing for years. I really love this world. And as such, I probably will start making more videos in this vein here on this channel. The more I learn about this stuff, the deeper I get into these groove boxes, the more this type of stuff is going to show up here on the channel. So if you're interested in that, subscribe and stick around. Like I said, if you're interested in picking up any of these groove boxes or samplers, I'll have them linked in the description box down below. Also, I will have a few channels linked down there that I have found really inspiring and educational in my journey over the last 18 months of getting into samplers. There's so many great creators out there and amazing musicians that are making really cool music and teaching you how to make really cool music on these groove boxes. And I'll link them down below because I've found them incredibly helpful and I think they're really cool. Once again, thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring today's video. I am incredibly excited to dig into the new Octatrack Mark II. I've had my eye on this for a long time. So thank you to Sweetwater for sending that out and for sponsoring the video. If you haven't done so already, like I said, please subscribe. Helps the channel out when you do so. And yeah, I'll see you real soon on the next one.